Hello everyone. Back again with film recaps. In this video, I'm going to recap one of the psychological horror films from 2007, titled 1408. Before we get to the storyline, I'd like to wish everyone a happy and great day. Without further ado, let's get straight to the storyline. The movie opens on a rainy night, where our protagonist, Mike, arrives at a hotel to check in, where he is enthusiastically greeted by the owners. The owners begin telling him about the history of the place, and how a maid hanged herself here many years ago, and ever since then, paranormal occurrences have begun to plague the hotel. Next, they give Mike the key to the most haunted room in the attic. The man also settles in, and waits all night for something to happen. However, nothing happens, and it turns out to be just a regular room. The next day, we learn that Mike is an occult author, who writes about haunted and creepy places. He arrives at a book signing at a bookstore, but the problem is that only 4 people arrive to attend the event. During the discussion, Mike reveals that despite visiting several scary places, he has never experienced a paranormal event, and he doesn't even believe in ghosts. Hours later, Mike, who lives in Los Angeles, arrives at a beach to do surfing. But when his attention is pulled away by a passing plane, he fails to notice the massive wave rushing toward him. The wave violently drags Mike through the water, and he eventually washes up on the shore, where a man rushes over to help him. After his recovery, Mike arrives at a post office, where he collects his mail, and heads to a cafeteria. He begins reviewing the letters, right when he suddenly spots an anonymous postcard from the Dolphin Hotel in New York, with a chilling warning that says, "Don't enter 1408. Mike only sees this as a challenge, so he calls the Dolphin Hotel, and tries to book room 1408. But the receptionist coldly informs him that the room is unavailable for any date, and abruptly hangs up. Curious, Mike now begins to investigate the hotel on the internet, and finds several mysterious cases of deaths that happen there. The next day, he speaks with his editor, who connects with a lawyer to handle the Dolphin situation. According to the lawyer, the hotel should give him the room if it is unoccupied, since otherwise they could be sued for discrimination. The editor asks Mike if he really wants to return to New York after what happened in the past, but Mike insists he won't tell anyone about his arrival. Days later, Mike arrives at the Dolphin Hotel, where the receptionist asks him to wait a moment, and summons the manager. Moments later, the manager, Gerald, arrives, and offers Mike an upgrade to a suite in the penthouse in exchange for not staying in room 1408. Mike obviously refuses, so Gerald invites him to his office for a private conversation. And then, when they get there, Gerald offers him a vintage bottle of liquor worth $800 as a bribe, but Mike once again refuses to change his mind. Gerald then reveals that no one in that room has survived more than an hour, but Mike dismisses it all as nonsense, and says his story will only provide free promotion for the hotel. Next, Gerald begins talking about several tragic deaths in the hotel, in which people took their own lives, but he adds that there have been 22 natural deaths that were never reported by the newspapers. It turns out there is a total of 56 deaths that happened at the hotel, and Gerald gives Mike a file containing all these horrifying details, and even offers him access to his office. He says Mike can write about whatever he wants, except that he must not check into that room. Mike accepts the expensive alcohol, but after that, he still insists on staying in that room, because he believes there's no such thing as ghosts, or even God. Realizing there's no changing his mind, Gerald finally gives him the keys to 1408, and reveals that it's not the ghosts in the room that are the problem, but the room itself is evil. They get in the elevator to reach the 13th floor, and Mike comments that the room must be filthy. But Gerald states that they clean the room once a month under supervision, and the maids work in pairs with the door open. No one stays there more than 10 minutes, but despite everything, accidents happen sometimes. A few years ago, a maid was locked in the bathroom for a few minutes. When they found her, she had gouged her eyes out with scissors, and was laughing hysterically. Not long after, the elevator stops, and Gerald says he can't go beyond this point, and tries to change Mike's mind one last time without success. Mike walks down the hallway, until he reaches his room, 1408, where he notices a woman and her baby entering next door. Upon arriving at his room, Mike notices that the room looks very clean and ordinary, nothing like the creepy place he had expected. He takes out his recorder and begins documenting his experiences, saying that the manager had scared him for no reason. While exploring the room, Mike finds a Bible, after which he goes to the bathroom and uses some toilet paper to clean himself. He glances out the window, where he hears the loud traffic noises. But he is suddenly startled when the radio in the room starts playing the song "We've Only Just Begun" by the Carpenters. Mike is shocked to see 2 chocolates on his pillow, which hadn't been there moments before. He assumes it's a prank set up by Gerald, and eats the chocolates without hesitation. When he returns to the bathroom, he is stunned to see the toilet paper perfectly folded, even though he had torn some off earlier. Mike turns off the radio, and checks the wardrobe and the surrounding to see if someone is hiding to prank him, but finds no one. Out of nowhere, he begins to feel an intense heat, and it turns out the thermostat isn't working. He then calls the front desk, where the receptionist immediately asks if he is ready to check out. Mike says no, and tells her about the damaged thermostat, so the receptionist promises to send someone to check. While waiting, Mike uses an ultraviolet light to reveal traces of blood and stains left by previous victims. Moments later, the technician finally arrives, but as expected, he refuses to step inside since he's terrified of the room. He gives instructions from the doorway, to which Mike obliges, and finally manages to fix the thermostat. Following this, Mike decides to have a drink. But then all of a sudden, the startled man turns off the radio, right when he notices it has even begun a countdown from 60 minutes. Just then, he hears a high-pitched ringing, and even when he peeks out the window, he can't hear the sound of traffic anymore. Then, out of nowhere, the window slams shut with force, causing a wound in his hand. Mike quickly heads to the bathroom to clean the blood, but suddenly the faucet begins to release scorching water that hurts him even further. Mike tries to turn off the faucet with a towel, but it fails, so he kicks the sink, which finally stops the flow. Retreating to the room, he bandages his wound, right when the radio plays the same song from earlier again, so Mike unplugs the radio, but despite this, the timer remains on. Just then, he gets a call from the receptionist, who informs him that there will be a 10-minute delay in his sandwich. An angry Mike says he didn't order anything, and says he's had enough, and wants to check out. But the receptionist barely pays attention to his words, and says she will put him through to the manager, which never happens. Frustrated, Mike grabs his bags and tries to leave, but he struggles to open the door, and ends up breaking the knob. After banging and kicking the door, he peeks out and is shocked to see another eye staring back at him, leaving him horrified. He begins to scream through the window, and finally manages to get the attention of a man in the next building. Mike asks him to call the police, but to his shock, the man begins imitating his movements. Soon, Mike realizes that this guy is another version of himself, and his other self being attacked by someone from behind. Mike is also attacked by a hideous figure, but the person immediately vanishes. Up next, a frustrated Mike throws a lamp into the street to get someone's attention, but he is shocked to see the object disappears midair. Later, things take an even darker turn when he suddenly hears the chilling voice of a little girl saying, "Daddy, where are you?" Mike continues recording, and theorizes that he was drugged by the liquor, or chocolate, and all of this is nothing more than a hallucination. But the nightmare grows even stranger when the TV in the room suddenly flickers to life, playing Mike's own video with his wife and daughter, which makes him very emotional. After the video ends, Mike begins to see the ghosts of several victims who had died in the same room. In the bathroom, he notices an old man in a wheelchair, who shockingly turns out to be his father. The man soon disappears, leaving Mike confused and terrified by what is happening to him. He continues recording, saying that maybe the whole thing is not real, and is just a vivid nightmare. Just then, Mike notices a huge crack in the wall from which a stream of blood pours out. He studies the hotel's floor plan, after which he climbs out of the window, and steps onto the ledge, so he can reach the window of the next room. He begins walking carefully, but unfortunately, he soon discovers all the other windows have vanished. He decides to return to his room, when out of nowhere, a woman lunges at him. Fortunately, this woman turns out to be another ghost, who throws herself into the void, allowing our protagonist to return just before the window slams shut. Next, Mike notices that the floor plan has changed, and it shows only room 1408 at the very center of the building. Brick walls suddenly appear in front of the door, and the window, and the air grows sharply colder, which triggers a painful memory. Mike recalls the moment he was with his wife, Lily, in the hospital, because their daughter, Katie, had become seriously ill. At this point, the thermostat continues to drop the temperature, so Mike tries to warm himself while calling for help, but there is no signal. Luckily, he remembers the laptop in his bag, and manages to video call Lily. She is stunned to hear from him after a year, as it is revealed that the couple has been separated for a long time. Mike explains that he is trapped in the Dolphin Hotel in room 1408, and asks her to call for help, but she is more annoyed that he is in New York, and didn't call her sooner. Mike tries to make her understand the urgency of the situation, but just then, the sprinkler system turns on, so the water damages Mike's computer and cuts the call. Mike somehow manages to stop the sprinkler, and now he decides to escape through the ventilation duct. After crawling for a while, he reaches near the next room, where a mother and her baby are staying. Mike desperately calls out to her for help, but to his shock, she is none other than Lily, and their daughter from the past. Mike keeps moving forward, and soon encounters another scene, in which he is engaging in a heated argument with his father. It turns out his father is berating him for neglecting Lily after their daughter's death. Mike ignores this, and continues moving forward, right when he notices a corpse in a hideous state, covered in webs. Suddenly, the corpse stirs to life, so Mike runs away while it begins chasing him relentlessly. Mike then ends up kicking the corpse, and returns to room 1408 once again. After taking a sip of his drink, Mike opens the Bible, only to be horrified to see every page completely blank. He then recalls another memory of his sick daughter, and how Lily was trying to comfort her by talking about God. It turns out Mike used to be angry at his wife for filling Katie's head with fantasies of heaven, instead of encouraging her to fight. In the present, the temperature keeps dropping, so Mike tries to warm himself by making an improvised bonfire from the files of previous victims. Even so, he continues documenting his experience, until he hears his ex-wife's voice coming from the laptop. She tells him that she managed to call the police, but when the officers entered room 1408, it was completely empty. Lily also says that she will be there in 15 minutes, but he notices the timer shows only 2 minutes, and says it will be too late. Just then, another version of Mike appears on the call, and says that 15 minutes is perfect. Mike realizes the room is trying to lure her in, and desperately begs his wife not to come here, but the call cuts off. And then, things turn bizarre when a massive tremor shakes the room, destroying everything. When Mike looks at a painting depicting a ship in heavy weather, the image comes to life, and he feels as if he were on a sinking ship in a raging storm. The walls also crack, and a torrent of water sweeps him beneath the surface. Seconds later, Mike finds himself on the same beach, where he had his surfboard accident in an earlier scene, where a man approaches him to help. Sometime later, he wakes up in a hospital, where Lily greets him, and tells him he had an accident. Mike tells her everything he experienced in room 1408, but she tells him that he never went to New York, so it was probably all a nightmare. Upon leaving the hospital, they go for dinner together, and Lily suggests that he write about this experience, and about Katie. He agrees, and asks her to stay with him, but she refuses, since he broke her heart in the past. The next day, Mike goes to collect his mail, but there is no letter from the Dolphin Hotel. He then researches the victims of 1408, but this time he learns that they died in different ways, and not because of the room. After this, Mike concludes it was probably just a nightmare, and he begins writing about his experience in the room. One day, he even goes to visit his estranged father in the nursing home, and tries to make amends with him. After finally completing his manuscript, Mike arrives at a post office to mail it to his editor, but an employee tells him they are closed, and Mike is shocked when he realizes it is the same man who worked at 1408 in his nightmare. He then notices other workers behind him, and they are also staff from the Dolphin Hotel. Suddenly, they begin violently tearing apart the place, until it begins revealing the interior of room 1408. Later, Mike finds himself amidst the ruins of the room, when suddenly his dead daughter appears before him, shivering and asking for help. Mike refuses to believe she is real, but she tells him she loves him, and they hug each other. But Katie soon passes away in his arms, leaving the poor man shattered. Moments later, the radio bursts to life with the same song, while Katie instantly turns to dust. Overcome with grief and rage, Mike loses control, and smashes what little remains of the room. It is at this point that the countdown ends, and the room returns to its original, pristine state. And then, the clock radio begins counting down from 60 minutes again. The phone rings, and a female voice informs Mike that he can relive the past hour over and over again, or use their express checkout system. Mike then notices a noose in the room, and realizes that the express checkout system means ending his life, which all the previous victims did to escape the hellish nightmare. He also sees his own tomb beside Katie's, and a glimpse of himself hanging lifeless from the noose is reflected in the mirror. Despite this, Mike refuses to check out that way, and the operator warns him that his wife will arrive in 5 minutes. Mike insists they can't have her, and hangs up the phone, which melts on the nightstand. He says that if he goes down, he will take the room with him as well. Determined, Mike turns the expensive liquor into a Molotov cocktail, and sets the room ablaze, before relaxing on the couch with a cigarette. The fire alarm goes off, and chaos erupts as the guests panic, and the hotel is forced to evacuate. Just then, Lily arrives outside, but the authorities prohibit her from entering the burning building. Back in the room, the sprinklers shoot streams of water to put out the flames. Here Mike hurls an ashtray through the window, and the sudden rush of oxygen triggers a violent explosion. Lily watches in horror as fireballs erupt from the window, while Mike crawls under the couch and laughs like a maniac. The scene then cuts to Mike's funeral, where he is buried right next to Katie, just as he had seen in a vision. Gerald also arrives to offer his condolences. He hands Lily a black box containing her husband's belongings, which were recovered after the fire, but she refuses to accept it, saying this is not how she wants to remember Mike. Gerald explains that her late husband didn't die in vain, and that he did the hotel a tremendous service, as room 1408 will never reopen. Next, Gerald returns to his car, and begins listening to what Mike documented on the voice recorder. To his shock, he hears the voice of Katie, pleadingly asking why Daddy doesn't love her anymore. And then, when Gerald looks in the backseat mirror, in the final scene, we see the charred remains of room 1408, where the ghost of Mike stares out the window while smoking. He hears his daughter calling and moves toward the door as the movie comes to an end. Okay guys, thanks for watching. See you again in the next video.